and I'm checking his pupils, and his eye's missing. And I'm looking for the blood, looking for the stuff, and he goes, "What's wrong? Is my eye missing?" I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, and I'm like, couldn't process it. And he goes, "It's been missing for years."
Hi, Candace.
Hi.
So nice of you to join us. How are you? Where are you?
Great. So I am in rural Ohio.
Mm-hmm. What part of rural Ohio? So
So
much of
I am
Ohio
actually,
is rural.
yes, full of cornfields and everything else. So I actually live in the county where the train derailment happened, in Columbiana County. So before that happened, nobody knew where I lived, but now I can just say, "Hey, the East Palestine train derailment," and everybody knows where I live.
Isn't it crazy? Like how in the blink of an eye, a thing can happen and suddenly you're on the map. Maybe in a way you didn't want to be, but you just wake up one day and it's a whole new deal.
Yeah, I was on a cruise ship in Aruba, and I got back to cell phone signal, and my phone was blowing up from our dispatch texting saying train derailment, this, and this. I'm like, wait, is this real? Is this happening? So I missed the whole thing.
How bizarre. As a first responder, there are probably a couple examples of words grouped up in a super specific way that make your whole body come to life, and the goose flesh and the pucker factor and everything. And two of those words must be train derailment. I mean, oh my God, how often have you heard that in your professional career?
So that was a first for us as far as, I mean, we've had some other small train derailments, but not nothing that catastrophic. So that was definitely a new situation, something new to me. We've had plane crashes and other things like that in my jurisdiction that I've responded to. But yeah, that was a first for us. So
I just can't imagine. What did it feel like to actually not be there in your zip code when that happened?
So knowing once I started to read what chemicals were involved, I was kind of happy I wasn't there.
I guess.
Um, yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but I think there is that thing where you start to wonder, how's everybody doing? The people that responded, are they okay? The community members, and you start to think about those things. I flew back in right before they did the release, so I got back in that in between time.
And before we jump into all the personal things about you, I'm just curious, how is the town doing? How are people feeling now that we're a year past it? Is it how's it settling?
Yeah, so the town of East Palestine is about 45 minutes from me. We're kind of on opposite ends of the county, but I've spent a lot of time talking to the fire chief there, Keith Dravick, and he they are really trying to rebuild. They have made some wonderful progress with some of the things that they've implemented within their volunteer fire department, from new equipment to we're getting a new training center thanks to Norfolk Southern. So
Hmm.
there's been there's always some good that comes out of tragedy, and you try to focus on that good, and that's some of the good things. So,
Well,
but it's definitely a lesson learned, and something for other volunteer fire departments to think about, because when you look at the design of trains, they don't go through big cities. They usually go through rural areas. So most likely when something like this happens, it's going to happen in a small town.
this is something worth riffing on a little bit longer too, because I got involved years ago with a sort of a public safety campaign that was sponsored by a couple of big railways. And it just had to do with something that sounds so crazy to most city dwellers because they don't understand the number of railroad crossings in the country. There's so many. And there's so many accidents that happen in like Bugs Bunny coyote ways. You're just like, you got to be kidding me. What do you mean you didn't see the train coming? But when you start searching for calamities, like Google Calamity Railroad, and it's just an endless sinkhole of people making really bad decisions. I mean, talk a little bit about that, and in the context that people who don't live in a town with a railroad crossing might be able to relate to?
Yeah, so it seems like a lot of people in rural areas, especially after a night of drinking, there's some of those that feel that they can challenge the train,
What?
and they don't always do that successful. So we have we've in my career I've responded to accidents that have involved car versus train that did not end well for the car, obviously. So that is, sometimes people, they spend a night drinking and they get this liquid courage and they think they're faster and than the train, and it doesn't always work out so well.
It is. I mean, I got involved in this because I was filmed once in this sort of iconic shot that you see in movies all the time. A guy is just walking off into the sunset down the middle of a train track. It's so stupid, but it's so ubiquitous. I mean, once you start looking for it in TV shows and movies, especially a decade or two ago, you saw it everywhere. And the number of people who wind up getting hit by a train. I mean, they got their headphones in and they're just walking down the train track and it comes up behind them and it's like mind-bogglingly crazy, but it's probably happening somewhere in the country right now.
Yeah, and we hear a lot about a lot of people, like you said, they like the way that train track looks, so they want to do photography on the train. So they end up on an active railroad. It's like railroad to take photos, which doesn't always end well for them.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's that education piece that we really need to educate the community. Like, stay off the tracks. It's not a place to play.
All right. Well, look, let that be the first lesson that we've officially learned from you. But let's talk a little bit about first responders in general. You know, I wanted to have you on here for not you specifically, but you're delightful, and I'm so glad you agreed to do it because from the early days of Dirty Jobs, you know, firefighters have always been a part of my life, and everyone I've talked to, male and female, big cities, small towns, they all say the same thing. They're worried. The math doesn't look right. The number of people who are volunteering is going down. The number of crises are rising, and it's not just train drama, it's everything. So just talk a little bit about your industry and why recruiting has become such a challenge for an industry that has so much goodwill. I mean, like the fireman is never the bad guy in a movie. Everybody loves you guys. And yet we're struggling right now to keep the ranks filled.
Yeah, absolutely. So 65% of the US is actually protected by volunteer firefighters. A lot of people don't know that. And there's about a $46.9 billion cost savings that volunteers give to their communities across the country. So that is huge. So it's really important that we look at what is the issue with why are we not getting new recruits through the door? And a lot of it, like you said, we have increased our call volumes dramatically. Like I actually started our township's EMS program, and when I first joined our department, we were like at 30 calls, and now it's like it's just, I mean, it's for this little town, it's gone over 100 calls in no time. I mean, it's just, and a lot of it has to do with the EMS calls, and that's on one department. And some volunteer departments, they're running thousands of calls a year.
What's
So there's a
happening though?
big
Why?
time.
Like what's happening in the population to drive that exponentially higher number of people to their phones to say, "Help me"?
Well, a lot of people, there's many different reasons. I think that people rely on ambulance services and calling 911 is because one, a lot of hospitals in rural areas, they've closed. If you look at kind of the statistics, there's a lot of hospitals, trauma centers that they're closing. A lot of people, especially in rural communities, they don't have primary care doctors, so they don't go. And I look at, my husband was born into a generational farming family, and that was his dad. Didn't go to the doctors, didn't go to the doctors. He went to the doctors in December around New Year's Eve, found out he had cancer, and he was dead 4 weeks later. I mean, it's just they don't go to the doctors because they don't have doctors in their community. And so I think then when they do call, they're in crisis. The other thing that we see are the way people drive. We have so many car crashes. It's just unreal the amount of crashes that are happening because people are horrible drivers or they're distracted. So, or dumb or disgruntled.
Disgruntled, distracted. dumb. We're just lacking the skill. Okay, so I mean,
Right.
but again, what is? I I don't know that people have ever been great drivers, but
No.
are are we like moving into some form of idiocracy here, or or is it distraction? Could distraction be at the top of the list that's making people less competent behind the wheel?
I think that's a big thing. There's more distractions than ever. I mean, gosh, for when most of us, when we all started driving, we didn't, whatever we got on the FM and AM, that was our choices. We had one radio station that worked, and now there's all these apps and there's all these fancy things that are kind of a distraction. Plus, now we have the cell phones. So, uh, and if you look at statistics, the most dangerous place for a first responder is the roadway. That's where we're getting struck and killed the most and injured. It isn't the burning buildings. It isn't, that type of thing. It is actually the roadway.
It's never the thing that gets all of the glamour or the attention, right? I mean, in
Right.
good things and in bad things, it's always it's the slip and fall. I mean, you can make your living in Cirque du Soleil, being the most acrobatic, gifted athlete there is, and you're going to slip on the soap in the shower. You're going to go down the stairs. I get that that's always happened. I just think it's so interesting. You're talking about a magnitude of hundreds of percentage points that people are turning to you guys. And we're looking at this incredible, I don't even know what to call it. Is it a skills gap? Is it a recruiting problem? Is it a PR problem? What do people need to know that they don't in order to make them think more favorably about the career that you've chosen?
So I think a lot of people don't realize that they can volunteer in their community. So there's always this perception that, because a lot of it, what we see in the Hollywood images, that you have to be a certain way to join the volunteer fire service. And honestly, there's a role for everybody in the volunteer fire service. Whether you want to run into burning buildings, be on an ambulance, or if you want to provide administrative support, people don't realize that there's that opportunity for them to serve their community. And I look at my grandma. My grandma wanted to be a firefighter, but she was told because she was a female, she couldn't be a firefighter. So at the age of 72, she got her first set of turnout gear and joined a department and
What?
provided support.
Your
Yes,
72-year-old
she
old
did.
grandmother got
Yes. Yeah. So, so obviously she was not running into burning buildings, but she was providing what we call rehab support, where she was coming to our fires, providing water, providing food, and
Mm.
taking care of us. And again, that is a vital role. And you had a seen the smile on her face when she would put on her bunker gear and put on her helmet and show up to those fires. I mean, she truly felt like she was giving back. So again, not everybody knows that they have that opportunity to volunteer. And also, times have changed where the work-life volunteer balance, things are crazy right now because most of us are working more than one job to make ends meet. We have dual income families and our kids are busier than ever. Like, I mean, my three kids are adult kids and they were very busy with extracurricular activities. But I look at some of these other young firefighters with younger kids that are still in school and they're even busier than my kids, way busier than we ever were as kids. So there's that time conflict where people are being pulled between how much time do I have to give up to volunteer? How much time do I have for my family? How much time do I have for my job? And then, so yeah, that's always an issue too. And I want to kind of circle back to what I mentioned about people not knowing that they have an opportunity to volunteer. If people are looking and want to volunteer, one of the tools that the National Volunteer Fire Council has is our Make Me a Firefighter campaign. It's makemeafirefighter.org, where anybody in the country can go online and fill out a little form, and we'll connect them with an opportunity to volunteer within their community, whether it be as a first responder running into a burning building or providing care on a medical scene or providing that administrative support or being somebody like my grandma who provided rehab. We've got a job for you and we will connect you to that place in your community.
That's awesome. And as you talk, it makes me realize that it's easy to forget that volunteerism has a selfish component to it, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I say that because when people's lives get as busy as you've just described, they look around and they start cutting some things out. And the time you have to volunteer most often goes first because it doesn't feel like a priority to your absolute set of needs, but it is. It's, I mean, not to sound like a lecturer or anything, but that was the big lesson from a show I did called Returning the Favor. It's good for you. Obviously, it's good for your community. Obviously, it's good for your industry. But it's good for your grandma at 72 years old to put on turnout gear and know that she's helping move the needle. And I have to think that sense of service, that sense of engagement, that sense of wanting to belong, that must have had something to do with why you got involved in all this.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I was not the typical generational firefighter that many people are. I was a single mom with three kids, and I attended a class at our community college about emergency preparedness. And from there, they said, come and find out what it's like to be a firefighter. So showed up one Saturday morning. They put me through the search trailer. I came out with the biggest smile ever. They took a picture. I posted it on MySpace. That's how long ago it was. And the the local fire chief reached out and said, "Hey, I think you live in our area. Would you be interested in volunteering?" I'm like, "Oh, I can do that." And so next thing I know, I was attending a weekend at our Ohio State Fire Academy just for women to find out what it was like to be a firefighter, to build your confidence. And I fell in love with it. I'm like, "Oh, I can do this." And so that's, yeah, and to be able to give back, it's a great feeling. And I think that's why many of us do this job. But what you mentioned earlier is there is this kind of, like you mentioned, that selfish component. I call it, you either have mom guilt, dad guilt, or firefighter guilt.
Great.
So you have to make a decision sometimes between going to little Johnny's soccer game or the fire department training or a call. And so whichever you choose or don't choose, there's going to be some guilt in there. So yeah, so that's something that I think we all struggle with. And I think, but again, there's a great sense of pride when you do make a difference in someone's life.
Because you're not doing it for the money.
And no, I'm still waiting for that paycheck.
I have a question.
Yes, Jeff.
Candace, can you tell us a little bit more about your training? I know as a woman, is it the same? Do you have to go through the same rigors that the men do? Is it slightly different? How rigorous is it?
Great question. So in Ohio, I actually had to take the exact same training as our career firefighters. So exact same training. There was no shortcuts. There was no special exceptions made because of my gender or my height. I'm only 5'1", barely. And
sorry, 5'1"?
Yes. And so the day we showed up for our ladder class, I had to carry a counterpart down 2 stories, fully in gear down the ladder. And I'm like, oh, there was only a couple females in our class. I'm like, all right, they're going to pair me with her. Nope. They gave me one of the biggest guys in our class. And the look on his face, he thought I was going to kill us both. And, but we made it down. I did not drop him. And I'm like, oh, this is over. And then the instructor says, now you have to do it again. And he said, you need to know that you can do this and not doubt your stuff. And not doubt yourself. And so I really did appreciate that. So yeah, it's the exact same training as our career counterparts that we have to do. And it is very physical. So it's definitely important because the cardiac instead are high within the fire service. We always have to think about that. We're definitely at risk for heart attacks and some of the other issues. So we have to keep up our cardio. We have to stay in shape and stay healthy.
For people who are just listening and not watching this, first of all, the MySpace reference killed me. Then you just casually mentioned you have 3 adult children. You look like you're 30 years old. Maybe. I have to ask, you're 5'1". How old are you?
I am almost 50. So.
I mean, what are they feeding people over there in Ohio? I mean, what
Yeah.
is I mean, no, I'm sorry, but you're 5. I've just got some physics questions.
Okay.
And maybe some sexist questions too. So forgive me, but I'm just going to say it. You're a 5'1" female who's approaching 50 years of age, and you're still in a world where you're prepared to carry a 200-pound plus man down a ladder or up a ladder
In full gear.
in full turnout gear. So yeah,
They're both in full gear.
Yeah. Well, I'm not carrying them up the ladder. Let me point that out. We're not going up.
Okay.
We're going down.
Yeah.
That physics.
yeah, okay, gravity. But I mean, okay, I mean,
Okay,
it's
yeah.
just so funny, and I just have to ask because who do you think was the most nervous, you or the 220-pound guy over your shoulder praying to every god he's ever heard of?
I would say my counterpart Jared, he was definitely nervous. I could see that his eyes were like gigantic because there's no ropes holding us on. There's no nothing. He's like trusting me as we're going down the ladder. So, but yeah, definitely him. But what you mentioned, it is about physics, and I had somebody. A male firefighter tell me that early on because it was before I went to fire school and I had joined the department and I was at that time I was just an EMT and we went on a call and it was just the two of us. And it was this big guy. I'm like, oh, how are we going to get this? Like, we better call for help. And he looked at me, he goes, it's all about physics, lifting and leverage. It goes back to that. He says, we can do this. Let's use a sheet. Let's do this. So I've had really great mentors that have taught me how to use my body and physics to be able to do the job. And it goes back to how I might do the job might not be the same way somebody else does the job. And that's okay.
Talk about the band of brothers mentality, or the band of sisters, or the band of brothers and sisters. What
Band
they're
of siblings.
the band of siblings. There you go. No, that I'm trying to get at the thing that you won't read on the job application, right? This camaraderie that evolves between certain groups of workers in certain vocations. First responders certainly have it, but how important an appeal, a lure is that, or how important should it be to people who are looking at your industry and really trying to figure out if it's for them?
So the bond that we have with our brothers and sisters, and not just within our own departments, but as we network and through other departments and across the country, it is so strong. I know that I can go anywhere in the country, or my kids can go anywhere in the country. And if something happens, I can call that fire chief and say, hey, I'm a firefighter from so and so. My kid is in trouble. Can you help them? And that is something that you just don't see everywhere in every industry, but the fire service does offer that. So my husband is a emergency department nurse. He used to be a firefighter medic turned nurse, but he was the first nurse in his hospital to get COVID, ended up on a ventilator back when COVID was, at its height and the world was shut down. And the entire fire service from across the country was there to support me, sending messages, sending care packages of food and gift cards. Even though I was alone because at that time everybody was isolated, I didn't feel alone because everybody showed up.
That is, yeah, you can't really put that on a t-shirt. You just have to experience it and learn it, and then live it. Um, what does it? We've got a sponsor on this podcast. A guy called Arthur Lee has a product called Life Vac. Right, it's this thing that maybe you've seen it. It's a device designed to save people from choking to death. It's real simple, suction oriented. I've had him on here once or twice, and every couple of weeks he sends Chuck an update. As a result of our conversation on this podcast, a certain number of people went and bought this product, and every couple of weeks, someone's life is saved as a result. He's got like over 2,000 photos on his hallway, in Massapequa, where he manufactures these things, and he walks down this hallway to work every day looking at people, mostly kids, who would be dead, but for this mad scientist gene in his brain that compelled him to make this thing. My question is, what does it feel like to save a life? And how addictive is that feeling?
So I don't know if I ever look at it as what does it feel like to save a life, but more the connections. Um, because I think, just being able to show up for people in their worst time and provide that comfort. And, one story comes to mind. There was this individual, and we have a livestock sale barn down the road from my house, and there was a rogue truck that ran him over. And
A
when I
rogue
was the first
truck?
person on, yes, it came out of gear. It was an old rickety truck, and it ran this guy over.
Oh,
So
geez.
yeah, so yeah, even in Ohio, you don't even have to have a driver to have a bad driving incident. So So, um, but yeah, so unfortunately, this man was run over. He was there by himself, didn't know anybody. And so when I showed up, I was treating him, holding his hand, and he said he had no family. He was new to the area. And so I held his hand through life flight. We connected, and I actually went to visit him in the hospital, which that's not something I typically do for EMS calls. But and we stayed in contact, and he did pass away, but he didn't pass away alone because I was there. And he was
Mm.
so grateful for that. So to me, having that opportunity to be there for somebody in their worst moment and provide that comfort, that means a lot to be able to do that.
How important is it to maintain a sense of humor in this kind of work? And does that sense of humor in some way rhyme with the camaraderie and the band of brothers and sisters you were talking about?
You have to maintain a sense of humor because some of the stuff that we see and some of the the constant exposure to traumas and stuff, it takes a toll on your mental health. And that was something that I wish somebody would have told me early on, like, hey, you can talk about these hard calls, you can get support for these hard calls, that's okay. But the things that we see are sometimes so off the wall. From there was this car accident. I pulled up on the scene, and the person had no pants on, and it's like, what's going on here? To I don't know if you know this, but if a pig catches on fire, you should not put water on it because then it's like a grease fire. So
A pig.
uh so yes, a pig, yes. So
How
Hold
does
on.
a
if there
pig catch
Yeah,
on fire?
exactly.
if the barn catches on the fire
Oh,
and the
yeah. Well,
pig
And
is
the pig's
inside
in
the
the barn,
barn,
of
yes.
course.
So yeah, yeah. To a neighborly dispute where somebody put an IED in another neighbor's mailbox, and so you just got to find humor in some of the things and just kind of chuckle because you never know what you're going to see from day to day.
See, you're glossing over things that I would normally dedicate 1 to maybe 3 hours to really getting into, like the notion of a pig catching on fire and then water being thrown on presumably a squealing porcine, right? And suddenly there you have a giant grease fire and the whole town burns down because the wild pig is fully involved, bolting down Main Street. That's a movie of the week. That's a book. That's a story. And what was the other? Wait, why were the guy's pants off in the car? You didn't land that plane. What's going on?
They said there was a domestic dispute, an argument, and they got mad in the car and they just left without pants.
Sometimes,
So
I've
and
only
they,
gotten mine once or twice, so
Oh,
it
yes,
happens.
yes,
no, we.
but it was
It's so
so
important
or
to know
here,
when to
yeah.
leave.
And sometimes even the and sometimes even the patients have a sense of humor. There was the one time I pulled up and there was a body in the middle of the road, and this gentleman on a motorcycle had just been hit and he was unresponsive, so giving him a little sternal rub, getting him back, and he came back, and I'm trying to talk to him, and I'm checking his pupils and his eye's missing, and I'm looking for the blood, looking for the stuff, and he goes, "What's wrong? Is my eye missing?" I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, and I'm like, couldn't process it. And he goes, "It's been missing for years." And so, but I was like,
He's handling this
something's
pretty
not
well.
right here. Yeah. So, but yeah. And it's things like that make up for, some of those rougher calls.
Well, land the plane for me then. But what is it
Okay.
if you were in charge of recruiting for the entire country, and again, how many volunteer firefighters are we down right now?
So we're at 65% right now, and we used to be at 75%.
Okay.
So we're about down 10%. We're 10% down.
And how many humans does that translate into? Like how many
So
people really need to show up starting now?
So we've got about 676,000 volunteer firefighters in the country. So we definitely could use I'd be happy if we got another 50,000. So,
Okay. All right, well, let's get them.
Yeah.
Let's get them.
Yeah, let's do it.
Say
Make
something.
me a firefighter.org. So
Make me a firefighter. Is that the URL?
it's makemeafirefighter.org. Yes, that's the site that anybody in the country can go to and apply to volunteer in their local fire department. We will get them connected.
And tell me again.
And keep in mind, it's not just to be a firefighter; it's to be in those supportive positions like your grandmother was.
Yes, in order to do EMS. And I always tell people too, as a kind of a recruitment tactic, if you're looking at a job in healthcare, join the fire service. This is a great way to see if this is something that you enjoy. Like, because you may spend all that time in college and all that debt and all that money and decide, nope, don't want to be a nurse, don't want to do this. And you just wasted all that time and money. But if you join the volunteer fire service, do volunteer EMS, you're going to get that hands on experience with the patients. You'll be able to know if you like it. And again, that's how my husband got his start. He was a volunteer firefighter paramedic, and now he's running a level 1 trauma center in Cleveland.
It's terrific.
So,
It's terrific.
yeah.
All right. Anything I should have asked you that I didn't? Anything you're just dying to say? Because I'm telling you, literally hundreds, dozens of people listen to this podcast, Candace. So this is a chance to get those 50,000 locked up right now.
All right. So I think my message to those people that are listening is that you are never too old or too young to join the fire service. Again, if this is something that you've always wanted to do and you're thinking, oh, but I'm too old, I'm this. Hey, if you're retired and you're looking for a way to fill your time, because, we see that a lot. People retire and they don't have a purpose. We can give you that purpose. Come join your volunteer fire department. We will keep you busy. We will train you. Volunteer fire departments will provide you with free training that also translate to a career path. You come join the fire service, get certified as a firefighter, get certified as an EMT, a paramedic, and guess what? You didn't have to pay for that, and now you have a skill where you can go and get a job.
Boom. Folks, look, she's 5'1". She's pushing 50. She can drag a 230-pound man down a ladder. What's your excuse?
This guy gets heavier every time you talk about it.
Well,
he's 200, 220, now he's 230.
It occurred to me the first time I didn't factor in the turnout gear, right? So, the guy was probably, he was certainly over 200 pounds, wasn't he?
Fair, yeah.
He was. He was a bigger guy in our class.
There you go. And that was Jared, as I recall. Is that right?
Jared, yes.
Big Jared, going down the ladder. A little help from Candace McDonald. I love it. Thanks so much. You're welcome back here anytime. And be careful out there.
Thank you so much for having me. And I encourage you to put your application in to volunteer, Mike.
You know what? I paid my dues. I got a helmet around here somewhere.
You do have a firefighter's helmet, yeah.
I don't know where I put that thing. No, it was the first season of Dirty Jobs. A woman named Holly, and it was up in Fremont, California. And these guys, Candace, you'll love this. They called Dirty Jobs, and they said, would you be interested? And I said, well, of course. And they were having the same problem then. This is almost 20 years ago. And they said, what would be good TV for you? And I said, can you find like an old house and just catch it on fire and let me put it out? And they said, we do that all the time. In fact, we got our eye on a crack house right now. I won't tell you where it was, but it was abandoned and it was no good. And they burned this thing to the ground. And I'll tell you, man, Chuck, honestly, when you're hanging onto the hose, you got two people on either side of you, and you are running into a burning building and knocking down those flames, and it is a freaking rush. There's really nothing like it, and I totally get why that saving lives, so many things about the whole process are delightfully addictive.
Definitely.
That just turned into a plug for season 1 of Dirty Jobs. Now available on Max. Check it out, folks. Thanks, Candace.
Thank you for having me.
Joining us now to elevate the sense of urgency even further with regard to our country's volunteer fire department is Jonathan. Oh, God, what's your last name, John? Don't tell me. Dayton. It's Jonathan Dayton. How are you?
Good. How are you, Mike?
I'm great. Thanks. Forgive me. I got my notes all around me in a pile of disorganized rubble. But now, as I look at where you're sitting, I'm not sure how to describe what I'm seeing. It looks like you started to build a room, but kind of quit when you got 2/3 of the way through.
Yeah, so my friend and I actually have a small podcast where we talk literally about everything and anything, and this is kind of our other studio. The unfortunate thing is that the Wi-Fi isn't the greatest in the building, but the studio is what's behind me.
Well, you know what? In life, and I'm sure you've learned this as a firefighter many times, you play the cards you're dealt, and you do the best you can with the materials that you have. Where in the country are you exactly?
Yeah, so I'm located in Cumberland, Maryland, which is in Allegheny County, basically on the little skinny slice of Maryland that people often forget about. That's where I'm located.
I love Cumberland. You're not far from like Frostburg State, the college.
Yeah, actually graduated from Frostburg State, so I'm only about 15 minutes away from Frostburg.
Unbelievable. Yeah, that I mean, this is probably not the best endorsement you're going to hear from Frostburg. I had a great time visiting there every time I visited, but that town, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Frostburg like on the top 10 party schools in the country for like a long time?
I don't know if they've been on the top 10. I know that our neighboring state university, Morgantown at WVU, is definitely up there with party schools. But Frostburg, I try to avoid the party scene as much as possible. So it's possibly that they could have been on the list, but I wasn't there. I'll preface that.
What did you learn at Frostburg, and did it have anything to do with the career in which you presently find yourself ensconced?
Yeah, so I work in healthcare currently. I run a statewide nonprofit. I went to school for pre-medicine, decided that I didn't like chemistry at all, and so I switched majors to psychology. I still kept pre-med, but I loved learning about thought and the brain a lot more. So that was my undergrad was in psych. But while I was at Frostburg, I did go back and get my degree in fire science as well, which kind of segues into the firefighting theme.
So fire science is the name of the major, the actual degree. That's a thing.
It is. It is. That's what my associates is in. While I was getting my bachelor's in psychology, I went back to school at the same time, which was a little bit crazy on my behalf, and got my fire science degree. And it's a lot of fire prevention, building codes, sprinklers, things like that are what you learn in the fire science program.
I think that is really interesting and super healthy. I talk about this a lot in my foundation. You know, the idea that when it comes to education, people tend to get in one vertical or the other. It's kind of like with vocations, right? It's blue collar or white collar. In your case, it's I just wonder how many psych majors also got a degree in fire science, and I'm guessing the list is pretty short.
I'm sure it's pretty short. I've always said when I went to school to get a degree that I was going to make sure that my associate's, master's, bachelor's, and doctorate, which I'm finishing up, all have different viewpoints. So I think it's important to be well-rounded. And one of the reasons why I went back for my fire science degree, I think it can only advance me in the volunteer service, fire and EMS service. So I thought it would be a valuable major.
So tell
What
me
do you,
about. Sorry, Chuck, you had a question?
yeah, I was going to say, what are you getting your doctorate in?
Public health. My master's is in business management and leadership, and so my doctorate's going to be in public health. So four separate fields, not even close to being related to each other.
Good Lord, dude. All right, look, I don't want to pry, but how's the? Are you in a student loan sort of situation now? You going to be okay paying all this stuff off in the
Yeah.
coming years?
Yeah, I've been very blessed over the years to have great parent support. So my doctorate's the only one that's going to be on loan. All three other degrees have been paid out of pocket and paid in full. So very fortunate and blessed there to have that support. So we'll see once the degree's over with in about a year or so how much I actually owe back to the government, but we'll see.
Well, talk to me then about. I mean, because you've got this incredibly well-rounded curriculum vitae. How does the role of first responder factor into that, and where does it live, sort of in the hierarchy or the chronology of how you see yourself when you look in the mirror? Who's looking back exactly?
Yeah. When I look into the mirror, I'm hoping that someone looking back at me is, not only my younger self, but someone a little bit wiser and older as well. I think when it comes to my education and the fire service, there's a real big connection between the two, for a variety of reasons. My start in the fire service was kind of non-traditional, in a sense that, like Candace, where she didn't have much family, I did have family, and I still consider that kind of the non-traditional role of sorts. My father was involved in the fire service for about 15 years prior to me entering. And in the fire service, you don't realize that there's more than just riding fire trucks and ambulances around. A lot of extracurriculars come into play. There are associations, there are state associations, there are national associations and councils like what Candace is a part of. And a lot of that takes, business acumen and leadership skills to run those organizations. And so I think that, the education that, I've been afforded to have has definitely made me a well-rounded person to serve my community in a little bit different capacity other than just riding on the fire engine and putting out fires.
Well, what's your take then on why recruitment has become such an enormous challenge? And talk a little bit, if you can, about how that challenge is impacting that industry where you live specifically, but also more broadly across the country.
So, in the volunteer service, it does take time, and it takes time away from your family. Training hours have only increased, right? And the same token, volunteerism, like Candace had mentioned, is down across the board. And my generation, which is Gen Z, so I'm still one of those last additions to Gen Z, so I'm only 25. People are money driven. They are financially driven. So if there isn't a motive for money incentives, volunteering your time for free often isn't something you normally think of. Sense of community service and civic engagement is down across the board. And where I live, it definitely is down across the board. And, I always tie it back to, the area that I live in. We have seen a huge decrease in population over the last 10 years. From 2010 to 2020, the census, Allegheny County is down about 10,000 people. And so you look at the volunteer service and you're like, let's supplement those with some paid staffers as well. But how can you do that if your tax base continues to leave, right? There's no money to pay paid people either. And so there's a very fine line and balance that needs to be, struck between, promoting volunteerism and promoting the career service, but also promoting the fire service in general. And again, my generation, money driven, financially driven. And I think that, just that sense of community and civic engagement is down. And so I'm hopeful that, with this conversation and with other conversations that I'm having across the country, that we can reignite and spark that civic engagement piece for younger members of society to really get involved and give back, because, that's what we did in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s. And, I want to see that, come back into play.
Well, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts, too, on another thing that I've read a lot about with respect to Gen Z and how that group of people in general is responding to work in general, specifically work ethic. Like there's a real suspicion, I think, among a lot of 25-year-olds, and it's not unfounded, that the baby boomers came along and basically spent all the money, and now there are all these old people in the country and a relatively small number of people your age, and everybody's looking to them, to work their ass off and keep the social security thing going, and there's a lot of pushback against that. And the thing I worry about is that conversation winds up turning work into the enemy. And once you make work the enemy, well, then you start thinking in a certain way that probably impacts volunteerism as well. So I guess the question is, why do you give a damn? Why do you care as much as you do about the stuff you seem to care about?
It's a community. I had a daughter within the last year, so that's changed my mindset a lot. And being from a family that is so inclined to give back to the community, whether that's through donations to our hospital system, through volunteering at the fire company, or on a board of directors at our local federal credit union, that sense is gone. But, my parents raised me to, remember where I came from. And, coming from a small rural town, all of my friends said, as soon as we graduate, we want to leave. We want to go expand our opportunity elsewhere, because there's more opportunity elsewhere. But there's opportunities where they're from too. They just have to realize them, but also be a part of that conversation and solution. And I think that, they don't realize they can be a part of those conversations and solutions. They can run for public office. They could join Rotary. They could join the Lions Club. They could sit on a civic engagement board. There are opportunities for them to voice their opinion and get involved and create that change. I think that, part of it's they're afraid, but also the easier way out is just to say that I'm going to move and leave, right? And so again, I think it takes more people put into a room together to have these conversations and to listen to these conversations to really set the seed, plant the seed, and start to spark to changing the mindset, which will ultimately change, how folks view volunteerism in the community, but more importantly, in our conversation, volunteerism in the fire service.
I see what you did there. Set a spark for volunteerism in the fire service. Very clever.
Yeah, that's
Just
right.
want you to know I'm paying attention. That psych degree is coming in handy with all your subliminal phraseology. I like it. Go back for a second, though, and do you think that the generational component in firefighting in general is working against the ability right now? Like, for instance, I talk to a lot of farmers. 1.5% of the people in this country are farmers, and something like 99% of them come from farmers, and they came from farmers. And you start to see the same thing with the Marines and military, and you see it in the skilled trades in general. And I just wonder, it's not going to work to simply preach to the choir. We've got to talk to people like Candace who are first generation in this space, and I just wonder how you can make a persuasive case for them.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, again, I say I'm still non-traditional, but in the sense that I'm different than Candace is that, again, it was generational for me. My father was involved. I got involved. And a lot of the volunteer service, fire service is, your parents and grandparents that were involved. But we're getting away from that. I was always given the choice growing up that, I didn't have to follow my father's footsteps. But, I was at a point in life where I enjoyed giving back, and it was something that I wanted to do. But now you're seeing a dynamic switch where, you're right, the farmers aren't following their father's footsteps into farming, or the volunteer fire service, the children aren't following their grandparents and parents into the volunteer service. They're getting away from it. And again, it all starts with those conversations. And I think that, it's really challenging because you have to sell what the volunteer service is. And, if you look back, and this is way before my time, back in the 80s and 70s, the volunteer fire service was a club. It was a place that you wanted to belong to. There was a list of 100 people that have applied to that department that wanted to join. It was an elite organization. And nowadays, it's not the same. The volunteer fire service across the United States has definitely changed and emerged, for good and for bad. And again, we have to get back to remembering our roots, but also remembering the future and how we can, progress towards advancement. And you mentioned, you asked a really good question about communication between the younger generation and kind of the older generation. And it's definitely challenging. And I think that it throws a wrench into a lot of things because the older generation, they often say to me, you just don't understand, right, what we went through and what we should do and how you remember tradition. And the younger generation is more focused on advancement. They're like, you don't understand, this is why we want to do X, Y, and Z things. But I think, the balance portion is important, finding that right balance. And I think that it takes, again, I keep saying the word conversation, but it takes conversations to find that balance. And I think that a lot of folks just don't want to have them because they're afraid. They're afraid they're going to lose something, whether it's something that they've, experienced for many years, that traditional piece. And the younger generations focus on maybe losing something else too as well. So, but it's finding that right balance. And I think that starts with conversations that are tough conversations.
For sure. But I think there's something very primal about what you do. There's certainly something very primal about fire. We need it, and the minute it gets out of control, we need to stop it. And it doesn't much matter, where your philosophy sits, right? If you're a biped in this century or 20 centuries ago, you're still dealing with the same basic thing, this need for a first responder, this need for people who will parachute into, I know there's all different types of firefighting, but I wonder, were you paying attention years ago when that horrible fire in, where was it, Arizona or Nevada, where like 19 hotshots lost their life. God, I'm just drawing
Granite
a
Mountain
blank.
hot shots.
Yeah, that. I mean, how do you think about risk as a 25-year-old guy doing a dangerous job who just had his first child?
That's a really good question. My wife wants me to slow down, right? Because there's challenges associated and job hazards associated with firefighting. And, it's different from being a volunteer. In the career service, you sign up for it because it's going to be your paycheck, right? It's different. In the volunteer fire service, it's not your salary. It's not your income. You're voluntarily running out your door when the siren blows to go save a life and risk your own. And so my mindset's changed, right? When I was 18, 19, it was gung-ho, run as fast as I can to the firehouse, get on the fire truck, and do the job, right? And it still is. That's still my mindset. Want to provide an excellent service to the community. But also at the back of my mind is, I need to be extra safe because the folks that care about me the most are the ones at home. My daughter, my wife, my parents, my grandparents, right? And so my niece and nephew. So, the mindset's definitely changed for me as a 25-year-old, as I continue to progress, in the fire service, going on my about 8th or 9th year now as an active firefighter. It's definitely growing and changing into that older, maybe a little bit wiser mindset that I once didn't have.
What about the idea that, it's not like you have to make a meal out of everything. It's not like you have to dedicate your entire life to putting out fires. Make the case for the opportunities or the benefits that somebody could enjoy from spending a couple of years volunteering, or maybe 4 or 5 years, or whatever period of time. Who cares about the period of time? What can you get on a transactional way, if not money, from doing the thing you're describing?
Your heart will be healthier when you're done, period. You will feel a sense of community. You will learn things about your community you didn't. You will understand and can relate to challenges of your neighbors who've gone through fires. You will feel a sense of pride for not only your department but your community. And overall, you'll just be healthier, and mentally, and I think physically, and even if you're not fighting fires, there, like Candace had mentioned, there are a variety of other things you can do. And I always tell this to every department that I get to talk to. There's always been this thing about, well, we need someone to do this, this, and this for this amount of work to be an active person, or we need them to show up this many times. Guess what? They're volunteer. Take them for as much time as they're willing to give. Because if you start pushing people away, then you're not going to have anybody there, period. Right? And so you're right, transactional, 2 years, 1 year, 5 years, I'll take you for however long you want to be involved. Because that means that's potentially one less call that I have to run and leave Christmas dinner for, or one last Thanksgiving dinner that I have to run out because someone else is there to help me. Or what I often tell my friends is that I don't like fighting fire alone. You always heard the two in, two out buddy system, right? I like to have people there to help me. And when I'm there by myself, it's a big challenge. And so, encouraging folks to join because, they will feel a sense of community and betterment is a good pitch. But also, it's truthful. And if they join, they will see it for themselves.
I've been keeping track. You've said the word community 5 times since we've been talking, which is interesting on a couple of different levels. First of all, you do live in such a specific community. For people who don't know Western Maryland, look at a map and zoom in, and whatever it is you're thinking about it, it's special. It's right. It's small, and it's right on the border, and it's such an interesting group of individuals. Every time I go through that part of the country, I'm just struck by the fact that I grew up in the same state, but a world away. You came from a world away. I don't know your heritage, but I'd love to hear about it because wherever your folks came from, here you sit wrapped in an American flag, and that's kind of a community thing too, I guess.
Yeah. So I was adopted at 4 months old. Came from South Korea. Um, the short version is that my parents had trouble conceiving a child, so they decided to go for adoption. They graciously and thankfully chose me. I came over at 4 months, and so I really haven't experienced any other culture or don't remember my South Korean culture. I do remember, growing up, it was, all Western Maryland based. It was the country roads, ATVs, fishing, hunting. And if you think of Western Maryland, it is community, and it's small town America. Reason why I chose this specific shirt today. And if you can't see it on the pot and behind you, but there's an American flag in our podcast studio here locally too, because it's a lot different. And I think that folks that listen to the podcast and obviously know you and what you do, it's all really relatable. But it's community based, right? And so in these small rural towns and communities, it's a lot different. Everyone knows everybody. Everyone knows everyone's tea and gossip, and they want to be there to save their neighbor. Where that isn't the case in larger cities and urban areas, they have a different mindset sometimes. And obviously, too, in larger cities, it's paid career firefighters and EMS, and not volunteers. And so a lot of the volunteer tiers across the country come from these small farming, rural towns. And that's why community is, not only important to me, but I think important to the volunteer fire service, and something that needs to be, said more often, but more loudly as well.
Well, we're certainly saying it here because from where I sit, Jonathan, I see more people than ever in my life feeling disconnected from more things. We're disconnected from where our food comes from, where our energy comes from. So much of what we rely upon is the function of skilled tradespeople and volunteers doing these things. Now, what fascinates me, and really the reason I wanted to talk to you, is because at the same time, we've got these giant deficits in the ranks of farmers and skilled tradesmen and first responders and firefighters in particular. And wouldn't it be ironic if the secret for more people who are currently feeling disaffected and disconnected from life could get plugged back in by simply volunteering in the way you're talking about?
100%. And the podcast, we're talking strictly about the fire service, but it's in general, right? Skilled laborers and trades and the fire service and EMS, people can be significantly more connected with their community if they decided to go down one of those routes. While, I think, Candace would be like, listen, and NBFC, talk about the fire service and build it up. But, it's more than just the fire service. There are vacancies around every part of rural America. Short story is that, we lost our paper mill here in Western Maryland in 2019. 700 jobs were lost in a community that only has about 2,000 residents. Now think about that. Now, not all of them lived in that community, but devastated us. And folks were worried about the financial impacts and obviously the job loss, but they didn't realize that it also impacted the volunteers. Folks that usually donated to the volunteer fire department no longer were donating because they didn't have the funds, right? Folks that usually lived here and gave back had to move to find other job opportunities. And so, the investments in those industries, we see them day in and day out, slipping away. But I think it's important to echo the importance of all those industries that require volunteers or as careers, because they're important to, rural America, small town America, and our community.
Look, man, you're right. You were lucky to be selected as you were by the parents who you have, but they were lucky to pick you as well. I think the country has a lot to learn from this particular 25-year-old. Candace mentioned a site. Can you just remind us of what it is again, where people should go to learn more about all this?
Yeah. Make Me a Firefighter is the NBFC site for the whole country. But I also would say that your local jurisdictions, counties, and states often have websites as well. And when in doubt, if you can't locate the right resources, walk down the street to your local fire company, knock on the door. They usually meet every week or every month, or they're usually hanging out there because that's the hangout spot. So ask them for an application, have them give you a tour, do a ride along, because I guarantee you, once you hop on a fire truck and hear the siren going down the road, passing cars blowing through stoplights, that you will get the hook, right? The hook, and you will want to join and give back.
Love it. All right, man. Thank you for doing what you're doing. I really appreciate your time. With a little bit of luck, we'll crash your website with people who want to learn more.
That's fantastic. I appreciate the time, Mike and Chuck, and thank you so much for having us on.
All right. Hey, what's your podcast called, by the way?
It's the Subject Matter Podcast, and so we literally frame it as we're experts in nothing, here to give your opinions on all of it. So we have guests on as friends and just folks in the community, and we just chat about random stuff. It's just something fun to do. We're so busy. Again, I travel the country and speak and talk and school and everything else, that this is just something we do every couple of weeks, just to relax.
Dude, I don't know when you sleep, but good luck with that
I
doctorate.
don't.
Congratulations on your shirt. Say hey to the folks and be careful out there.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Chuck.
If you like what you heard,
And even if you don't,
won't you please,
pretty please,
subscribe?
Well, I hate to beg and I hate to plead, but please, pretty freaking please.